separate yourself from your ego or your mind from your ego, you're not a cigarette smoker. The body you're in just happens to be smoking cigarettes. And it really resets that thought process. And it's been really profound with people in studying addiction. There needs to be a lot more research done. But
welcome to the Prime Life Project podcast, a place to help you unlock your full potential, both mentally and physically, to become the best version of you. Welcome back to another episode of the Prime Life Project podcast. I'm your host, Daniel James, and today we're going to be talking about something I can categorically guarantee you've never spoken about before, and we've been talking off air already. Mike is excited in the background. I'm excited. We've got a fantastic guest today. But before we go into today's episode, if this episode makes you think, if it changes your perspective on anything, do us a favor, like and share the episode to help us spread the word to help as many people as possible. So the gentleman I'm talking to today is Amir Karian, and he's part owner of the world's largest vertically integrated mushroom farm and is the founder of a new venture, Alchemi Mushrooms, which grows and retails functional medicine mushrooms. He grew up in a family that grew mushrooms, but his passion for mycology only began when he had his personal healing to go through. He learned firsthand the power of medical mushrooms, and then he learned to share this information with others. His passion for mycology has now led him to the forefront of mushroom technology and the world's health, wellness, and sustainable solutions. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Very much looking forward to this. And again, I know we've got a bit of a slight time delay, but it's because you're in California and we've woken you up to do this podcast. So very much appreciated. Let's just sort of go back to the beginning, because mushrooms are a very weird niche thing to get into. So why did your family originally, 3 generations ago, get into mushroom farming?
That's a question I don't even know how to answer, because back then in the US, it was mushrooms weren't very popular, even as produce. You know, it's kind of like the weird side thing on the produce aisle that people didn't really know how to use in their, culinary and in the kitchen. So just taking it way back, my uncle immigrated here from Iran, and he got involved in just agricultural industry. And part of the organization he was working for had a small mushroom company that he was in charge of as well. And, eventually that was divested and he purchased that, small company. They were producing about 50,000 pounds of mushrooms per year. And then once he took that company private, he essentially grew it into Monterey mushrooms and Amirs, which we know of today, now being the largest vertically integrated mushroom company in the world. My involvement didn't start until, about 6 years ago. And I was involved in the company early on, growing mainly your culinary mushrooms, so like portobellas and button mushrooms, oyster mushrooms, shiitake, the ones you see in the grocery store, which was always cool to me, learning how to farm these mushrooms and the breeding that was done behind the scenes. But my passion, like you mentioned, was really came about for these medicinal and functional strains that most people may not have heard of, like lion's mane, reishi, cordyceps, and then a few different psychedelic mushrooms, and how they can benefit human health beyond just from a culinary standpoint.
So did you have an interest in this before your own personal health issues, or is this something that only came about due to your personal health?
That actually really catapulted it. So about 8 years ago now, I was diagnosed with Lyme disease. So I was very ill when I was going, in late college and right after graduating college. So dealing with personal health issues, and it got so bad that I was essentially bedridden for a great part of a year. I had every symptom from A to Z. And, a lot of people that are diagnosed with Lyme disease, they really struggle because it can manifest in any symptom, really. For me, it was just like debilitating nausea. Brain fog was so bad, I couldn't read anymore. Like, you could put a piece of paper in front of my face and I couldn't tell you, I could see words there, but I could not cognitively, describe what I was reading. And several different symptoms like that. So A lot of people go undiagnosed with Lyme disease because doctors just say, oh, I don't know, you know, you have a ton of different things. I can't put my finger on it. But luckily I was diagnosed. And so I started going to, you know, top infectious diseases doctors that could help me cure this, because I was pretty ignorant about what Lyme was. I was a young kid. So I just thought, all right, give me the medicine. Let's get me on my way. I need to put this behind me. And every doctor would tell me the exact same thing. They'd say, Amir, Lyme disease is a chronic illness. You don't really cure this, but we're going to get you to a point where you can, you know, feel healthy again and you can live your life. And to me, that was, you know, no way. You know, I'm 21. I'm a whole life ahead of me. I'm curing this. I don't care what you have to say. So I kind of, you know, respectfully shook the doctor's hand and went on my way. And so fortunately, I was introduced to a nutritionist who was claiming to be able to cure Lyme. And when you hear something like that, you're very skeptical because there's nothing in medical journals that says Lyme can be cured. But then here we go, this lady who's not even a physician, she's just a nutritionist. I don't want to say just a nutritionist.
Well, no, but it's interesting because we've had some doctors on the podcast before that, again, aren't your typical normal run-of-the-mill doctors. But like you're saying here, there's things that can be reversed, which people don't even know about. You go to your specialist, normal doctors, and as you said, oh no, you've got to live with it. And it's like, well, you don't really if you dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah. Exactly. And you really realize how much of what's going on is food related, like what you're putting into your body. And it's a shame, and to no fault of any doctor, doctors have their own toolbox and they learn what they learn through medical school. And a lot of what you learn, a lot of the curriculum that physicians will learn in medical school come from technologies and advancements made by pharmaceutical companies that are patenting drugs. And so they teach that, okay, when you see these symptoms, this is the drug that will fix it. And for Lyme, there was nothing in the toolbox there. There's no one pill cure. So when I went to this nutritionist, I kid you not, it sounded like voodoo. It sounded like, you know, what are you making me do? What are you telling me to do? This is the weirdest thing ever. But I was desperate. At that point, I was like, okay, I'll literally try anything for a few months and see how it goes. She put me on this protocol. It was the most intense diet you could probably imagine. I was eating nothing but steamed vegetables and like, you know, wild caught salmon or grass-fed lamb and, you know, very little portions of meat and then some potatoes here and there. No oils, like not even olive oil, nothing like that. So I couldn't go to restaurants for a greater part of a year. And then the other part of it was supplementation. And I always, you know, when someone tells me to take something, I'm always someone that likes to dig in and learn what I'm putting into my body. So I did a lot of research on all the plants that are in these supplements, a lot of adaptogenic plants and herbs and roots, and most of the supplements had a functional mushroom in them, whether it was cordyceps or reishi or turkey tail. And I didn't know about them back then. But obviously, you know, I have a history with mushrooms with my family. I didn't know anything about these mushrooms. It was kind of a few years before it started getting popular in the Western world. It was mainly Eastern medicine. So, you know, fast forward 1.5 years of going through this treatment, I was, you know, night and day difference in my health. My brain fog cleared up. I was losing a ton of hair. My hair grew back. I could actually walk 20 steps without feeling like I'm going to pass out. I started going to work again. So it was a complete transformation for just, you know, supplementation and diet.
How long did that take for you to start to notice a difference with that? Like how long was it?
It was very gradual. So it's hard to say like 6 months and that was good. It was really like, it was kind of a roller coaster. I'd have weeks where I felt amazing, like I was back to normal, and then kind of a little dip. And so it was kind of this cyclical wave, but it was uptrending. And I think after about 1 year to 1.5 years was when I was really like back in the gym. I was able to work out for an hour, you know, like what felt like a full recovery.
So can I just ask, can I ask with your mental health during that time? Because obviously, as a young lad, you couldn't go out, couldn't socialize much. I'm assuming you couldn't drink any alcohol. There's all these different things that as a young lad, you're meant to be doing it. Well, so meant to be doing that sort of time. You've had an actual doctor say, this can't be cured. You've got this crazy lady saying, try all this stuff. you're not seeing instant results. So I'm just trying to relate this to my audience that maybe think, oh, this isn't working for me, whether it's fat loss, whether it's health related. So what was your mentality like? What was it like for you to be going through this and pushing through without getting that instant hit of, oh yeah, this is working amazing?
That exactly what you mentioned was the most difficult part of the whole thing. The diet, obviously that's hard. Taking 60 pills of supplements a day, that's hard too. But the hardest thing is pushing through when you don't know for sure anything is going to work, because you don't know if it's been proven. And yeah, I wasn't able to go out and do anything with friends. I was 50 pounds lighter than I am now. I looked like I was like a starving skeleton. And a lot of it was blind faith and trust in the process. It was a lot of desperation, and a lot of instances there I felt broken. I feel good for a week and then just take a huge dump in my health, and felt like, okay, this is a big waste of time. And yeah, it took a lot of persistence. I thought, I kind of put blinders on and thought, this is what you need to do. If it takes 1 year, if it takes 2 years, you have to go through with this, because this is the rest of your life. You cannot be feeling like this. So I kind of just like dug deep and thought, do whatever it takes and just get through this process and give it the 2 years it needs, because that's what she really told me. It's going to take time, and it does take time.
I absolutely love that. The fact that you're saying there a few things like trusting the process. Like, I mean, like you've literally made this commitment to do something and then trusting the process with it. I would also like to apologize, because I feel like sometimes because of the delay, I'm cutting you off. So I never mean to cut you off. So I do apologize with that.
No worries.
So when it comes to this, so you've now, like, we fast forward a little bit. So you've managed to go through the whole protocol. You're feeling loads better. And then I've heard that you used to kind of like put it to your family that's growing these these portobello mushrooms, like the mushrooms that you eat in normally. And then you put to them, hey, listen, I think there's a market for this. How did your family react to that?
Yeah, so I definitely knew there was something here with these mushrooms, especially because when I went back to the physician that diagnosed me, I went back to that physician and I said, do the same PCR DNA test and check my Lyme, and it was gone. And they were dumbfounded. So I knew there was something with these mushrooms that more people needed to know about. And when I went to family and thought, like, we need to get this involved in our business, it's going to be, a big part of people's wellness journeys, and we should be, the people doing it. At that time, the response was, it's very niche market. This is Eastern medicine. It's kind of this holistic alternative stuff. It's not well studied. It's not well documented. And yeah, the juice isn't really worth the squeeze, because these mushrooms aren't the easiest to grow. We don't have a ton of experience doing it. So why do it if there's not going to be enough demand for it? And they were right. I mean, at that point, there wasn't enough demand for it. So it was a lot of effort for possibly no reward. But I was still very fixated on them. I was determined and knew, or hopeful, that it would have the impact on other people that it had on me. So I kind of took it upon myself to just start doing this. I was working with the company after recovery, and working with growing our standard products and mushrooms and things like that. But then I started doing this on the side. So after my day to day, I had this old abandoned shipping container that was it's on the side of our property, and I asked, hey, like, we're not using this for anything. Let me use it. I'm going to convert it to like a mini farm and start growing this stuff. And I said, yeah, go knock yourself out. So started collecting the different strains, reishi, lion's mane, and started learning how to cultivate these. I was working, a little bit with our researchers at the lab, trying to get some more insight from them and anything they knew about growing these mushrooms. And it took several years of learning how to really optimally grow these mushrooms. What airflow do they need? What gas exchange? What are the best genetics and the best foods to give them to grow really high quality mushrooms? Because this isn't just food anymore. This is medicine. So we can't just grow the mushrooms and eat it. We need to grow the mushroom and then test the chemical compounds and make sure the levels are there. And a lot of different variables come into play in making sure food as medicine is really potent. And then, yeah, four years later after doing this, approached my uncle, says, hey, we're getting a ton of demand now for chaga, for lion's mane, for reishi. Do you grow this? Do you know how to do all this stuff? And I thought, okay, yeah, man, this is like what we've been working on and what I'm telling you. So finally, we were pushing forward with this, and that's really what prompted me to start Alchemi, because I was growing these mushrooms and I wanted to start getting them out to the world. And now in 2022, Q1 of 22, we're going to be launching our wholesale division to market these powders to different retailers so that they can use them in their formulas.
I absolutely love that, because again, just some of your audience could pick up on that. Like the fact that you've gone to your family and said, I think this is a great idea. And they've essentially laughed at you. And you've believed in it so much that you've then gone out your way and be like, no, I believe in this. But not only that, you've then found out that it's actually super hard to do. So it's not just something that you're sort of doing as a side thing. Like the amount of studying and research you've had to go into this, like if, again, people listen to this, if you've got something that you fully believe in and you're invested in it, you have to go for it. Because as you then said, it came full circle 4 years later, your family's then coming back to you, being like, actually, people are kind of talking to us about these mushrooms. And you're like, listen, I've been telling you this the whole time. Like, this is the stuff I'm growing in that shipping container. You should listen to me to start off with. Like, you could have been ahead of the curve, but you were. Like, I think that's a real key point for the audience to listen to there, like about that, not necessarily an entrepreneurial mindset, which is what you've applied it in, but just anything in life in general. If you've got that gut feeling and you trust yourself, I talk about all the time, you have to back yourself, which is exactly what you've done there. And I absolutely love that, which I'm so glad you said that story, because when I've heard you talk before, that bit for me was a bit like, I love this guy. Like, he's just gone all in. He's like, do you know what? I back myself, and you've gone for it. So talk to me then about these mushrooms, because we've got the traditional like growing mushrooms that people eat, but these medicinal mushrooms, you sort of alluded to it a little bit there. They're essentially living organisms. I know nothing about mushrooms, but I know they are crazy as fuck. So can you talk to me about these mushrooms and what makes them so special, what makes them so unique, and how do you actually grow them and farm them?
Yeah, so these mushrooms, first, I have to say, so far, even culinary mushrooms like your portobellas and your shiitake button mushrooms, they all have chemical compounds that benefit human health. But the functional medicinal mushrooms that we're all getting introduced to now, they have a lot more immune boosting properties and just different chemical compounds in them that can help with different benefits, essentially. So one of my favorites right now is called Cordyceps militaris, or Cordyceps in general, the species of mushrooms. And it's being studied pretty heavily right now for energy generation and for athletes in general. Michael Jordan actually, like, he really was a fan of these mushrooms. A lot of Olympians were using them back in the 80s and 90s, and it's kind of starting to come around full circle. So this mushroom is really great for athletic performance because it increases VO2 max, which is essentially the body's ability and efficiency of oxygen utilization in the muscles. So they've done clinical studies with athletes, people either swimming or doing stationary cycling, and they find that after just 3 weeks of supplementing with this mushroom, their maximal energy or oxygen consumption increased significantly, and their workout time to exhaustion increased as well, compared to the placebo. So they were able to go further, longer during high intensity training, and their recovery even sped up because that increased oxygen flow helped reduce lactic acid buildup in the muscles. And cordyceps has several other benefits: anti-tumor properties, antibacterial, potentially can help with diabetes because it can help metabolize glycogen. And yeah, so, all of these mushrooms have various different effects. Another one that's really amazing that I like to take every day is called lion's mane. And lion's mane is one that can benefit cognitive function, focus, and memory, and is even being seen as a potential remedy to not only prevent, but even reverse symptoms of Alzheimer's. Which is really incredible. There's still there's still a lot more research to be done in getting into human trials, but so far trials on mice have been really promising at literally reversing stages of Alzheimer's. They've injected mice with chemical that induces the plaque that buildup that occurs in Alzheimer's and dementia patients, and they found that after supplementation with lion's mane, that the plaque essentially reverses and starts to die down. And it induces neurogenesis, so the regrowth of neural pathways in the brain.
How many? Because obviously you said about this, like, so with these different mushrooms, I know you said that the first one has been clinically studied. Is lion's mane now actually being fully studied on a deep level? Because that's some crazy stuff, especially when you say about that first one. I can't pronounce how you said it, but the fact that they send reducing tumors and stuff like that is absolutely crazy. Like, and obviously I know that the actual proper medical world is catching up with this now, but is there a lot of these clinical studies that are going on behind the scenes?
There's a lot more happening these days. A lot of this has been anecdotal and kind of just traditional medicine. But for example, another mushroom called turkey tail, that's actually a prescribed anti-cancer medication in Japan right now. And I think, Western world really has a lot of catching up to do. And the reason it's prescribed is because it helps boost immunity as patients are going through radiation and chemotherapy. So it's really, it can really stimulate the immune system. And it's showing a ton of promise. And it also has tumor inhibition properties too. So it can actually start breaking these tumors down. So yeah, a lot more clinical studies are being conducted. And I think this new explosion in like the psychedelic world is getting people so excited about the mushroom industry in general. So a lot of capital is being poured into mushrooms across medicinal, psychedelic, the whole space is really being flooded with capital now. So it's definitely a positive.
We're definitely going to get into the psychedelics. So the audience are listening into that. We are delving into that. So don't worry about that. So I've only really heard, before we had this conversation, I've heard of lion's mane and I've heard of reishi. Like, I know there's loads of different forms of reishi that you can get. But so audience listening to this, like we spoke about this before off air, at the minute, the UK listeners, we can't get your products because, again, I know it's all organic and it's really well like farmed. I know that. So let's say for my listeners here, because there's loads of supplement shops that pop around. There's always companies that are saying, oh, it's got reishi in it, it's got this, it's got that. Like, what should people look out for when they're trying to buy supplements that have got these mushrooms in? What's to look out for to know that it's actually good quality mushrooms that will do what it says it's going to do in the correct dosage?
Right. So my big points for quality, two different things. One is there's a big discrepancy in the market right now between products made from fruit body mushrooms and mycelium, which the difference is, fruit body is what you typically think of a mushroom, the part of the mushroom that pops up out of the ground. Mycelium is essentially the root system of the mushroom that's unseen by human eyes. It's, if you've ever like dug up a piece of soil and you saw that white filaments that look kind of like spider webs in the soil, that's the mycelium. And mycelium really is the organism. It's the immune system of the mushroom. It's navigating its way through a really hostile microbial environment in the soil, and it's protecting the organism itself. And then, only when the mushroom is ready or the fungus is ready to reproduce, that mushroom is formed. A lot of people, the mushroom fruit has been traditionally used in medicine. Now we're finding a lot more information about how beneficial the mycelium is as well. There's a lot of novel compounds in the mycelium that you don't find in the mushrooms, and the inverse is also true. There's a lot in the mushrooms that are not in the mycelium. So when looking for a really high quality product, it's important to find products that have both the mushroom and the mycelium to get a really full spectrum product. Full spectrum is key. And then the second point I would make is knowing where your supplements are sourced. And it's especially true with mushrooms, because mushrooms are such powerful bioaccumulators. They're sponges. So they'll absorb anything in their growing environment. The water you're giving the mushrooms, the soils and the substrates, the food that you're giving them, how they're handled after harvesting, sanitation practices and things like that. So since they can really absorb everything, it's important to make sure they're grown in clean environments. And that's why we really preach US grown, or countries with very high standards of quality control, organic certification, and things like that, because most of this is grown overseas in Asian countries, and we just know that they don't compare to the US when it comes to quality standards. So yeah, I would say those are the two biggest factors: knowing where your mushrooms are grown and looking for full spectrum products.
So did you know anything about that, Mikey? Like this is what I want to get you on here, because I've heard, like I said, reishi. I've heard people talk about reishi for years, probably about 5-6 years. And I had a client once say to me, "Oh my God, this reishi stuff, you got to try it. Like, I feel amazing on it." But I'm very much like you when you very first started on your journey. I have to know something about supplement before I start taking it. And I tried to look into this reishi stuff. And this, again, 5-6 years ago, there wasn't much about it. So I was really sort of skeptical. I've always in the back of my mind been like, oh, there's got to be something in it. And as soon as you came about, I was like, right, this is the perfect guy. So that whole thing about the supplements and finding quality was more for me, being the little nerd that I am, like, what do I look out for? And I had no idea there was two different things when it comes to the body of the mushroom and then all the stuff that goes on underground, but it makes perfect sense. And the fact that you said there about the mushrooms, we said before about them being live living organisms and they're like sponges, it makes sense. Almost like meat, like animal products, you want to make sure you're getting the best quality stuff that you possibly can. So I love that. That's absolutely perfect. So why do you think then that this isn't talked about much in mainstream medicine? So obviously on the underground functional medicine stuff, I say underground, it's not like it's a drug lord, like the functional medicine route, it's talked about a lot. Why do you think that mainstream media is so against talking about this sort of stuff? Because you're saying that they've actually, like in Japan, for example, they're using stuff for tumors and all that sort of stuff. So this stuff is known. So not tumors, to reverse cancer. So this stuff is known, like it's out there. It's not crazy. It's not woo-woo, which it potentially could have been seen a couple of years ago. So why do you think modern medicine is so against pushing forward with this?
It probably really comes down to the fact that these are not drugs, right? They're not chemicals. When a lot of Eastern medicine is based in pure plants. So they'll take a root or a tea leaf or a mushroom, and they will, they know the power that the holistic organism has on the human body. And so, manufacturers will really just grow and sell that as a medicine. But in the Western world, we know that the pharmaceutical industries reign supreme, and they're always looking for, okay, this has a lot of promise. Let's figure out what chemical is the silver bullet in this so we can turn it into a drug, we can patent it, and then we can profit off of it. Because you can't patent a mushroom. It's an organism, right? Like psilocybin, I'm sure everyone wishes they can own the patent on psilocybin, but you just can't do that. So companies are looking for weird ways to formulate it and find something to patent. But because of the fact that you can't patent a reishi mushroom, for example, there is no funding going into clinical studies. Because why invest millions and potentially billions of dollars? Average drug costs about $1 billion to go through clinical trials and FDA approval. So why put in all that money if we're not going to get any money out of it? We're basically just funding research for the whole world to be able to profit off of this. So it doesn't get funding. And so there's no studies, and then it kind of falls to the, small alternative medicine healers to utilize.
I love that. And it's just my audience, the long-time listeners, just listen to what Amir's saying. Like, just listen to what all my guests are saying. Like, follow the money. As soon as we said, by the way, I asked that question, Mikey was behind me, like just rubbing his hands, like, again, you've got to follow the money. Now, again, this isn't conspiracy stuff. Like, this is just how the world works. This is what it is. So again, the stuff that Amir's talking about, if Amir had listened to modern medicine, and again, by the way, I just want to point out, I love exactly what you said earlier on about doctors, and I 100 million% agree with what you said. Like, and I'm so glad you said that, actually, because I don't think they get enough credit. They are absolutely amazing. They are fantastic at their job. Like, they save lives. They are incredible. But as you said, they're only limited to what they're taught in school. School is taught in the Western world. It's not taught in Eastern medicine and all that sort of stuff. So they're very narrow-minded in what they're teaching. So if you listen to that modern Western culture, like, you would still be ill. So people listening to this, just expand your minds a little bit. And this is what we're saying here. Like, but do you mean we're trying to help you guys to actually become that best version of yourself? So I'm really glad that you said that and hit the points from both the doctor's point of view and also like actually the pharmaceutical and stuff like that. So this is going to sound like a bizarre question. It's just sort of popped into my head. Because these mushrooms are living organisms and they're so hard to quote unquote control, I've heard you talk about another podcast about how much maintenance goes into these mushrooms to make sure that no poisons come in and different things that can literally wipe it all out. Is it like looking after cattle? Is that the kind of level of detail you've got to go into about looking after these living things, or is it not quite that out there?
It can definitely be compared to that. I mean, cultivating any living organism has its challenges. they're all prone to diseases that we would like to think we can control, but ultimately we can't even control disease within our own bodies. What makes us think we can control disease happening in a mushroom? So we have all the parameters in place and procedures to control any sort of variation that may happen to the crop. But you know, we've been in this business 50 years and we still get blindsided. Like every other cultivator of any crop knows, sometimes things are inevitable. The hardest thing, I mean, disease control is one thing. Variability in the raw materials is a whole nother thing that realistically is close to impossible to control. Where are we getting the wheat straw that the mushrooms, or the wood chips that the mushrooms are coming from? Is it grown exactly the same way every time? Is the food the exact same way? Because the food you're giving the mushrooms is going to affect the mushrooms just like what we eat affects us. You know, so it really can change the genetic DNA of those mushrooms. And genetics is really key, because there's so much genetic variation from mushroom to mushroom, even within a crop. So having procedures in place that can control genetic mutations and genetic variations to give the exact same mushroom every single time is difficult, to say the least, but necessary. It was difficult when we were only selling food, right? Because you know, because food, we just want to make sure, one, it tastes good, it's clean, it's healthy, and it looks pretty. Because shoppers shop with their eyes; they don't want a weird, wonky shaped mushroom. But now we took it to a complete step further. All those things are still true, and now we need to make sure our chemical constituents are potent and bioavailable.
I love
So
that.
it's really, yeah.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, are mushrooms just massive adaptogens? Is that what they specifically are within the body? Is that what they do? Are they classed as an adaptogen?
They have adaptogenic properties, definitely. And essentially, you know, different mushrooms like reishi, for example, help the body adapt to different internal and external stressors. They're really good at helping detoxify the liver. And that was a big reason that they were so pivotal in helping me cure my Lyme disease. Because when you're dealing with something like cancer or Lyme disease, something that suppresses your immune system, you end up with so many different ailments and co-infections. It's not just Lyme disease, it's not just cancer. Now, because my immune system is so weak, I have digestive issues. My kidneys are starting to be worn down. My liver is super toxic. So taking these different adaptogenic mushrooms, essentially they help upregulate organ function. Cordyceps is incredible at helping adrenal function and kidney support. So my kidneys can help, you know, detoxify my body and give me more strength and energy to fight the illness. Reishi mushrooms can help detoxify my liver so that I can cleanse out these harmful byproducts from Lyme spirochetes and different things like that. So yeah, they are definitely adaptogens, and they help, you know, allow the body to fight off different pathogens.
Just wanted to hit that with the audience, obviously, like an adaptogen, for the people who don't know, an adaptogen is something that adapts. It's basically what it says. It is an adaptable thing. So it goes into the body. So for example, I take ashwagandha. I know it's not a mushroom, but ashwagandha, like if you're in a very anxious state, it'll bring you down. If you're in a very depressive state, it'll bring you up. So wherever you're at, it adapts to what the body needs, and it helps the body to adapt. So basically, the reason why I went down that tangent there was because obviously we've got this living organism that we're basically harnessing its power, very much like the bacteria in the gut and stuff like that. We're then taking that into our body. And I've got these little images in my head, like these little superheroes just going in, sort of doing their thing. Like, you've completely changed my view on mushrooms in the short time we've been talking. Like, it's been absolutely fascinating just talking to you about this. So I just want to get my audience a bit of a flavor into that, about how they actually work, basically going in there and helping the body with what it needs, essentially, which is why they're so amazing at what they do. Let's change gears a bit now and go into psychedelics, because I know there'll be a few people listening to this episode. They've heard the word mushrooms. So all people will know about psychedelics is magic mushrooms. That's what everyone hears. That's what everyone knows about. So I don't know anything about psychedelics. So can you give me a bit of an overview about mushrooms and psychedelics? Is it the same mushrooms? What is a magic mushroom? And yeah, just give me a bit of an overview about what mushrooms and psychedelics have in common and what they can do.
Yeah, there are several different psychedelics that are being studied right now in conjunction with mushrooms, like MDMA and ketamine. But mushrooms are showing what I believe the most promise right now in clinical studies. So magic mushrooms, they have health benefiting properties similar to functional mushrooms, but they contain a chemical called psilocybin. Psilocybin needs to go through our digestive system to become activated, and it basically breaks down into a chemical called psilocin, which then binds to our serotonin receptors and can linger in serotonin receptors. And basically, when it binds, those receptors start exploding with signal, and it can cause neurons that don't typically fire to start firing, and creates new connections and communications within the brain. So, I mean, on a base level, parts of your brain that don't talk to each other are starting to wake up and talk to each other. And you know, there's something called synesthesia that you may have heard. It's essentially the crossing of senses. So it was like a funny joke in the 70s and 80s during the whole psychedelic movement that, oh, I'm high on mushrooms and I can smell the color purple. There's actually there's truth to that, right? Because it's causing a connectivity in parts of your brain. So when, you know, maybe you'll feel pain and associate that with the color red, or maybe you'll smell a flower and associate that with a feeling or a memory, things like that. So it is pretty profound in the way it's helping, you know, drive new neural pathways. And there was actually a recent study that came out of Yale on mice, and it really confirmed that a single dose of psilocybin mushrooms was able to create long-lasting and growth in neural pathways in the brain's frontal cortex, which it can really do a lot for behavioral changes if you think about it. So what psilocybin is being thought to do right now and being clinically studied to do is essentially get the mind out of conventional thinking patterns, because it allows us to take a step back, connect different pathways, and essentially reset our mentality and get out of the grooves, almost destructive grooves of patternistic thinking. It can be thought of almost like a rebirth. So what's really cool with that theory is that it can help with things like depression and anxiety and different addictions. Johns Hopkins is really one of the institutions that's leading a lot of clinical studies in this space. And the first one they did that was really cool was on terminally ill cancer patients that they were terrified by the thought of their own mortality. And it was like paralyzing to them. They couldn't go on more, knowing that, you know, they only had a certain amount of time to live. And after a single therapeutic dose of psilocybin mushrooms, their fears almost vanished. Most of them were completely released of this paralyzing fear. And they kind of compared that experience to, you know, being one of the most profound experiences of their lives next to having a child. It's crazy if you think about that, you know, a trip of mushrooms, comparing that to, you know, the experience of birthing a child. So yeah, and that study really set the gateway to thinking, you know, how is this helping, how can this help with depression and with addictions? Because what's happening is with the psilocybin mushrooms and generating new ways of thought, it's essentially breaking down barriers of your own ego. You might have heard of a concept called ego death or ego dissolution. Yes,
me and Mikey just discussed about that on the podcast. About Mikey went through an ego. What was the yeah, Mike was on LSD, and he described in our episode about how he actually went through, he discussed his ego death. So yeah, we've discussed that on the podcast before.
Yeah, it's a really cool concept because it essentially your ego protects you from connecting. It's a wall that's put up that really is objectively defining who I am, who you are, what I am, and that can lead to a lot of destructive narratives about yourself and about other people. So when you think about, you know, addiction really is a mental imbalance and a thought process that the second you wake up, you know, I'm addicted to cigarettes. I have to have my cigarette right now. I cannot get through the next few hours without that. And when you can break down those barriers and separate yourself from your ego or your mind from your ego, you're not a cigarette smoker. The body you're in just happens to be smoking cigarettes. And it really resets that thought process. And it's been really profound with people in studying addiction. There needs to be a lot more research done, but initial one that was done found that there was 80% success rates, a study of 15 participants, 80% success rate over a 6-month period with getting them off addiction to cigarettes.
Mate,
compared to
Can I just say, you have just fucking blown my mind. I just had goosebumps the entire time you were talking then. I know Mikey's having, because obviously Mikey's gone through this personally.
Yeah.
The way you articulate things is unreal. Like, you have got such a way of articulating this stuff. And I understood everything you just said there when it comes to the mental health. Again, some of my audience, they've got such a, they potentially have got such a negative connotation with psychedelics. But what you've just explained and how you've just explained it, I think will put a lot of people at ease, because you've just explained how it works. The fact of these neurons. So again, there's a phrase, neurons that fire together, wire together, fire together, something like fire together, wire together, something like that. Basically, you create these pathways in the brain that basically becomes your personality and what you do. So then the fact that you're just saying there that you can basically step away from the you that is destructive, the you that's got these addictions, these negative, you can step away from that and reset. What the fuck, mate? That is crazy shit. And then you're even going deeper than that. They're talking about like having an ego death and understanding what you said there, which is essentially what spirituality is all about. Understanding that there's no difference between me and you. There's no difference between me and Mikey. There's no difference between anybody. We are all fundamentally the same. So actually being able to understand that and experience that is absolutely incredible. I've heard something, I can't remember what podcast, or I think I've definitely heard it on a podcast before. I don't think it's one of your ones, talking about psychedelics and monkeys back in the day, chimpanzees, something like that, like, and how we actually managed to evolve is that because we were eating these mushrooms and these psychedelic things that then opened up these pathways in our brain that then led us to evolve. Have you heard anything about that? What's your thoughts on that?
I have heard it. I heard Paul Stamets talking about it, and I think the theory came from Terence McKenna. I'm not positive, but I heard the theory, and the way it goes is essentially there's been no genetic evolution for hundreds of thousands of years in Homo sapiens, but something has happened. There was a massive, significant rise in intellectual capacity without physical evolution happening. And I don't know if you read the book Homo Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari.
I haven't, but Mikey has. Yeah.
Super interesting book, and it talks about that exactly. Like, we evolved few 100,000 years ago, and somewhere around 70,000 years ago, there was this crazy shift in intellectual capacity. All of these things, our mental capacity just exploded. And what really changed, and no one really knows. So it's been theorized that ingesting psilocybin helped to induce genetic mutation in the brain and start to awaken the mind. Obviously, that's not going to happen one time. It happened over hundreds and millions of different doses of psilocybin that are picked up from a piece of shit really on the ground, ingested, and then it becomes a norm in culture and in tribes back then, and it starts to have genetic variation and mutation happening in the brain.
I've heard about psilocybin. I'm sure that's used in ritual practices in some cultures in the world. I'm sure it's a Joe Rogan podcast I heard on this on. Is psilocybin the one that grows under cow shit?
It definitely does.
Yeah, with the moisture and stuff like that. Like, basically, like, I heard something about that, but apparently it's used in different cultures, like as an actual ritual thing.
Yeah, a lot of different hallucinogenics have been used in psychedelic drugs, like ayahuasca and DHT from the toad venom that is secreted. My knowledge on that is limited, but psilocybin mushrooms, yeah, they are traditionally grown from dung, because most of the environment is just carbon based and wood and different fibers, and then the second there's a nitrogen base of dung, a mushroom just will pop out. It gives it that energy for it to fruit. I suspect that, as the industry moves into growing more mushrooms, it's not going to be, we're not going to be having crops of poop and growing mushrooms out of there. There's other ways to do it. But yeah, I mean, that's where you would find them in the wild.
So just to clarify here, I'm not suggesting that my audience for a single second goes on a psychedelic journey. I'm just want to open your eyes to the possibility of what's going on here, because it's spoken about a lot. And as we've sort of alluded to before, mainstream media doesn't really talk too much about it. So I would rather give you the information from someone that is going to be, we spoke about this off air, the forefront of potentially things coming in the future. So you're hearing it from one of the guys that's it's been in this game for a long, long time. So when it comes to psychedelic stuff, I've heard this before when it comes to, my personal thing, I've never taken a psychedelic, but if I was going to, I'd much rather take something that is of nature. So rather than LSD or something that's sort of man-made, I would rather take something from a mushroom. Is there any, I know with, but I'm not for a single second going to take your word as gospel here, but is there any real dangers of taking hallucinogenic mushrooms? Because people fear the dangers. Like, we did a drug education stuff in this country when we were at school, and talks about guys taking hallucinogenics and jumping off buildings or eating their own arm off. Just crazy stuff that's just fear mongering at its finest. So in your experience with mushrooms, in your experience with psychedelics and the mushrooms, is there any negative things that can come from it?
There's a book that Michael Pollan just wrote called Your Mind on Plants, and it describes this concept like really profoundly. Essentially, that every plant medicine can be looked at either as a medicine or a poison, depending on how you interact with it and how you utilize it. And the same is true with coffee, opium, and hallucinogenics are going to be no different. I don't believe we know yet the long-term potential harmful effects. Definitely a potential for psychosis if it's abused, like any plant. But one thing that's really important to note is a lot of the studies that are being done right now for treating depression, treatment-resistant depression and anxiety and addiction, they're not, it's not necessarily a psychiatrist prescribing you a bottle of psilocybin and saying, go home, enjoy. It's not like that at all. It's kind of in conjunction with therapy. And therapy is, I believe, more than half of the treatment. Psilocybin is nothing more than a tool in the therapist's arsenal to be able to expand and open up the mind to the treatment. So, when people are undergoing treatment for, the cancer patients that were undergoing treatment, they take a relatively high dose. They have headphones on with, nice music on, they have eye shades on, and they're being guided through the process with their therapist. And at the end of the trip, they're basically sitting down and trying to make sense of the whole experience and reflecting on it and allowing it to take hold and really make a profound experience out of it. I don't think taking the drug home and just tripping with your friends, although it could very well have very beneficial impact, it's not the same as what we're going through and what we're studying right now with therapy. So that's something people, I think, should keep in mind, especially with those higher doses. There is a potential that we find microdosing to be beneficial. It's really theoretical right now that minute doses of mushrooms considered less than a gram, which would be a sub-perceptual dose, not enough to really set a trip, but to just get therapeutic or health benefits from it, like expanding your mind and opening up creativity and enhancing your mood, can be beneficial, but there's not enough science there to really validate it yet. So it's going to be interesting. I think the way we're going to see this play out is it's going to become regulated for therapeutic doses. It's only going to be administered under supervision of a registered licensed physician or a therapist. And then we may see several years down the road, it become a recreational compound.
I've never thought of it like that. How you've just explained it there from a therapeutic point of view. Again, I didn't realize this. When we talk about psychedelics and how potentially it could be used to help mental health, depression, anxiety, all sorts of stuff, and it never clicked it could be used in conjunction with therapy. But that makes perfect sense, as you said there, because people worry about having bad trips. So again, obviously, if you're with your friends, and I think the thing I like you said about there is you're in a safe space, it's relaxing, it's calm, you're in a very good mental health space anyway. Even if you're not mentally okay, you then take it, it can help guide you. Whereas if you're a very depressed person and you're very socially awkward, and then you're taking something with your mates, and your mates are dickheads, and they kind of like, it could cause real sort of issues for you. So I'm really glad you said that as well. And the key word that you said there about microdosing. So again, microdoses, small dosages. So it's not a case of more is better, it's in control. And again, when we talk about like plant-based stuff, like again, we talk about like coffee and all that sort of stuff, like we do use this stuff all the time, but we don't see it as a drug. Like coffee is a drug, caffeine is a drug. It's one of the most abused drugs on the planet. Yet we don't think about that. We talk about mushrooms and straight away people think, oh my God, it's the end of the world. So I'm really grateful for you to actually clear that up. And again, for my audience, I'm not suggesting for a single second you go and start tripping out. I just want to present this information to you from not necessarily an expert in that field, but an expert in mushrooms and where that field's going. So is there any other point you want to mention about hallucinogenics or psychedelics when it comes to mushrooms that potentially might be interesting for the audience?
It's going to be interesting to see where it goes. I'm excited just as anyone, in the future is, for right now, it's like almost unpredictable. We don't know which direction it's going to go. A lot of the studies are being done with what's called synthetic psilocybin, which I'm very against. I'm a big believer in nature provides the real benefits. And we're going down the same road that we did with opiates. Opiates have always been looked at, the poppy seed in a very beneficial medicine in helping surgery or helping people die painlessly. And, once pharmaceutical companies get involved and start synthesizing chemicals out of it, like Oxycontin, you have rampant epidemic abuse. And it's synthesizing a new chemical that, isn't necessarily found in nature. And what we're doing right now with psilocybin, all of the clinical studies are being done with synthetic psilocybin. I can't say for sure it's going to lead to issues, but we're definitely going against the true nature of the medicine. Who knows what other chemicals are working in conjunction with psilocybin to benefit us that we're just cheating by going with, a low cost alternative. So yeah, something to keep in mind. I'll always be a proponent for the real deal. But yeah, so. We'll see where it goes.
I agree with that. I love what you said there, because again, like we're just sort of cheating it to get the main thing, but it wasn't in nature just one thing. There's loads of other things that are actually in that mushroom that's actually helping you get the psilocybin, and again, how the body actually absorbs it and utilizes it. So again, that's absolutely fascinating. Amazing information there. One final question that I've heard you talk about before. Apart from psychedelics, what other future do you see with mushrooms? Because there's loads of things now when it comes to like meat replacement, packaging. Like, what is the future? Like in 10 years' time, if I get you back on the podcast, we're going to, by the way, in 10 years' time, we'll be the next Joe Rogan. We're going to have millions of views. So we're going to get you back in 10 years' time. What could we be looking at in terms of what mushrooms are actually doing?
I think you're going to look around the room you're in right now, and a lot of the different materials making up objects in your room are going to be made out of mushrooms. So that mycelium that grows underground, it's a very tenacious web-like material. And a few really innovative young companies have been exploring how it can be used to create materials and fabrics. And we've actually since partnered with one to start growing fabrics and meat alternatives. What's happening is we create essentially a food source for the mycelium, and we grow the mycelium around this food source, and it creates this gluing effect. So we can give it anything like, agricultural byproducts, wood chips, things like that, grow the mycelium on it, and it creates a brick. And that brick can be used for packaging material. It can be used to insulate a house. It can be used as a car panel, a rocket ship panel. I mean, the sky's really the limit with it. And now those companies are finding that slicing it into very thin layers and compressing it in the right way, it can become indistinguishable from leather. And there are a few partnerships with major companies like Hermes and Adidas making their products. So there's been a Milo shoe, you can look up MYLO, that Adidas partnered with, using straight up mycelium as the leather. And Hermes made a bag out of just mushroom mycelium as the bag. And then the meat alternative is really cool. Essentially, they're growing the mycelium in a way that it can simulate the texture of meat. And it's really tasteless. So getting the texture right is key, because you can add flavors to make it taste like bacon or chicken or steak. But if you can get the texture right, it becomes virtually indistinguishable. And we met with these guys that were at our facility last week. And I haven't tried the products they're working on, but they said we did taste tests with a lot of people that are, culinary experts, and we give them real bacon or fake bacon, and they could not tell the difference. I want to test it for myself. That seems, I don't know. I don't know if it sounds too good to be true, but it's crazy if it's right, because it can be a much healthier alternative, lower sodium, lower fat, lower cholesterol, high in protein. And it's obviously much more sustainable for the environment. Growing mycelium, it takes a fraction of the resources as growing, any sort of livestock. So
I love that. It's because I've heard you talk about that before. So I wanted my audience to see the future. So you heard it here first. This stuff is coming to you. Where can people find out more information about you and your company?
So our company's Monterey Mushrooms is our parent company, and you can look us up at montereymushrooms.com. And our new company, Alchemi, spelled ALCHEMI. You can look us up at alchemimushrooms.com or Alchemi Mushrooms on Instagram. And we like to show a lot of like behind the scenes footage of our farms and how we grow everything, so people can feel really connected with the nutrition they're getting. So follow us there. There's a lot of good information on our website as to what mushrooms can help with what. And yeah, shoot us emails, DMs. We'd love to talk about mushrooms. So
yeah, that'd be awesome. I'm going to get Mikey to ping everything across the bottom of the screen, because like I said, I've been following you guys on Instagram, and behind the scenes stuff that you do is cool as fuck. And some of these crazy ass mushrooms that you've got on there are awesome to see. So Amir, honestly, thank you so much for your time today. This has been absolutely incredible. And I know my audience got some value. So again, don't forget, if you took any value from today's episode, don't forget to like and share it with a friend. Again, if you're on YouTube, give us a subscribe, give us a thumbs up. If you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Amir, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Pleasure. Thank you.